Let's break down this news conference with our panel from Washington. Matt Schlapp is contributor with The Hill. Susan Page, Washington bureau chief at USA Today, and Fox News chief Washington correspondent James Rosen. All right, James, first an overview about this news conference and your assessment.
Well, aside from the sort of hand-to-hand combat with selected members of the news media whom Mr. Trump deemed especially dishonest or irresponsible in their reporting, there was a lot of news. We learned, for example, that the repeal and replace for Obamacare will happen, as Mr. Trump said, essentially simultaneously. We learned that we're expecting a major report on our hacking defenses within 90 days and that we should get a Supreme Court nominee within the first 2 weeks of the Trump presidency. So there was a lot to it substantively, quite apart from the sort of raucous flavor of the thing. I think in all, it made good on his promise that he made when he visited that carrier plant in Indiana in November, and he said, if it's not presidential, that's okay. That's okay. And I think he's going to redefine what it means for us to have a presidential news conference.
Now, I didn't invite you on here for the impression, but that's added bonus. Susan, the pushback from the president-elect, from the transition team, could not have been stronger to these reports.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of criticism today by journalists of the decision by BuzzFeed to publish a salacious, unsubstantiated version of that report. Less so for CNN, though, I think, because they were with their report. But in any case, his pushback on that could not have been fiercer, I think. He used a four-letter word in describing it. He said it was outrageous and unethical. And when the CNN reporter, Jim Acosta, tried to ask a question, he wouldn't let him ask a question because of criticizing his organization. So, you know, this was a situation I think was pretty perilous for any politician to have had a story like that come out, to be dealing with it in a few hours. And he dealt with it with some real confidence and certainty. It doesn't mean that story's going away, but I thought he was pretty effective in answering the questions about him just, you know, the morning after these stories had surfaced.
Yeah, 17 questions he took, Matt, and this is an indication perhaps of President Trump interacting with the press. We have seen him on Twitter go after different reports. This was confronting these things head on in person.
Yeah, and he likes to do this. I mean, you know, his last press conference was quite a long time ago, and he broke a lot of news in that press conference. And I think some of his new handlers at the campaign said, hey, we have to stop this for a while. But if it was up to Donald Trump, I think he would take his, I hate to say enemies in the press, but those who push him in the press head on. He likes to take them on and give his answer. And by the way, he was incredibly effective in knocking down this, what I think really is a really outrageous story that came out of BuzzFeed. And I also think he was particularly effective in knocking back this somehow Russia's, you know, got the goods on him, or somehow they financed his business career. I think he knocked back those answers very effectively. And I agree with James. He made a lot of news, and he is recasting what a presidential news conference is.
Yeah, and just to be clear, senior Trump transition advisor telling Fox tonight that he wasn't given this two-page document. That was the original CNN report. They're telling us that that is not accurate either, that it was kind of a mention. I want to play a soundbite about the split in the finances and how that is going to play.
I could actually run my business and run government at the same time. I don't like the way that looks, but I would be able to do that. These papers are all just a piece of the many, many companies that are being put into trust to be run by my two sons. And I hope at the end of 8 years I'll come back and I'll say, oh, you did a good job. Otherwise, if they do a bad job, I'll say, you're fired.
His sons, James, running the company, but he's saying he's essentially pulling himself out. That's likely not going to satisfy all the critics about these ties in Washington.
If you're one of the Trump sons, that was probably a daunting moment to be acquainted with the idea that you could be fired as a son from your father. Not from the business. You're fired as my son. Look, there are, and we've seen them in this town. Some of them have been dining out on the purported Trump conflicts of interest story for 3 months now. Professional givers of ethics flack, and I doubt those people would have been satisfied by anything short of some kind of corporate Harry Carey to the Trump organization. But I think think by most objective standards and by the standards of the people, this will look like he went pretty far along the way to do everything he needs to do, in fact, to avoid even the appearance of conflict of interest.
Yeah, Susan, I mean, the lawyer comes out, he steps aside, she lays out exactly what's going to happen. Any money that goes to any of the properties that he will still own, he's going to donate, he says, to the federal treasury. What about the appearances and the practicality of this?
Well, I think James is right that he took some steps that, and probably at some cost to himself, and maybe some pain to himself with this business empire that he has helped build. But he didn't, I mean, maybe it's not possible to deal with the appearance of conflict of interest that are likely to follow as his sons run this empire, which is, of course, called Trump. And it's not going to be a surprise to anybody who has dealings with the Trump sons that their father is the president of the United States. I think this is going to be a continuing story. But, you know, one point that Donald Trump made today was that when the question was about why don't you release your tax returns, he said the only people who care about that are reporters. Voters don't care about that. If that's the case, then even if there are questions about the appearance of conflict of interest, maybe it doesn't hurt him, at least with the people who are behind him right now.
And yet, Matt, Democrats on the Hill will likely continue to bring that up as a big problem. Is this going to somehow hinder his ability to make deals or get along with them to get things across the finish line?
Yeah, look, I think that everything he decides when he doesn't follow the normal order of things, it has to withstand public scrutiny. So along the lines of the taxes, you know, the American people have to think that, you know, he's not doing anything improper. When it comes to his how he handles his business empire, you know, what I'm just shocked at is this Obama head of the Office of Government Ethics just taking Trump on directly, saying that this is not a real plan. I listened to that press conference. We all did. It is a serious way to approach what we haven't seen before, which is a multi-billionaire becoming the president of the United States with these marquee assets that you really can't liquidate and you really can't sell. It seemed like a common sense plan, but if the American voter and the American people somehow think that he's profiting off the Oval Office, there'll be massive negative political consequences. But I think from everything I can see, although this is all a new way of doing it, he is passing the test of scrutiny.
Yeah, James, quickly, it's not like he has to just get rid of some stock. I mean, he's a real estate developer.
No, he's putting things into a trust, and he's donating the proceeds from foreign governments when they stay at his hotels. One final point I wanted to make. If you listen carefully to Mr. Trump today, the biggest enemy, so to speak, that he has in Washington from his own perspective isn't the news media. It isn't John Brennan at the CIA. It appears to be Big Pharma, because what he said was, we've got to get our drug industry back. Pharma has a lot of lobbies and a lot of lobbyists. He said they're getting away with murder. If you're a lobbyist for Big Pharma on K Street tonight, I don't know if you should be raising or lowering your fees right now.
Panel, thank you. That is it for our first hour of Special Report. Coming up after the break, a live report on the President-elect's news conference. Stay with us. We're in Daytona Beach, Florida at Embry-Riddle University.